Bow, bow, bow.
My name is Jessie Cates. I'm an entering student in the MA in Cultural Production program. I just moved here from California recently, so this snowy weather is very new to me. My undergraduate degree was completed at UCLA. I was a student in the Women's Studies department, and I did a minor in art history. My current interests are in family rituals and traditions, and using art as a means to fill spaces that have been left absent because of a disappearance of ritual in American culture. That about sums me up.
Wow, art to fill spaces. That's an interesting, not really so novel idea, but it's a different way of thinking about it. So what are you thinking about? What kind of spaces are being, like ritual spaces, but what kind of, can you go more in depth, I guess?
Sure. Well, some of my experience is actually in working with families who have had abusive backgrounds. So they have been displaced and moved into shelters. So their space that they call home has changed drastically. So some of their family rituals that were associated with home may have changed drastically as well. So it was my job as a volunteer to come in and use art as a way to create new ritual in this new space of the domestic shelter.
Interesting.
There's an example.
Very intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
So, are you talking about? You're talking about hands-on art activities, not so much art in the sense that we think of art, but more the process of art.
Exactly, the process. Yeah, that's a key word. The process,
The
not
process
the
of art.
product.
The product isn't important.
No.
Is it important to you, or does it matter what the product is?
It's important to me in the sense that I'm critical of my own work, but when it comes to working with other people, I stress creativity over product.
Do you attempt? Have you ever attempted to kind of read the art in a sense, to read the product?
Actually, that's what we were encouraged to do with the organization that I work for, rather than using words like "that's beautiful" or "that's great" or "you have such talent." We were taught to kind of examine what their work was trying to say. So.
Very cool, excellent. So, what kind of ways are you reading art? What did you find yourself leaning towards? Any certain? I guess we all have. I know because I did my undergraduate degree in music, so when I analyze music, I lean heavily towards things like Schenkerian analysis, and we all have our certain eye kind of ways to look at things. Were you ever, did you see were you looking at a lot of violence? Did you analyze a lot of violence in pictures, or did you analyze traces of what could be violence in a more metaphoric sense, or anything like that?
Interesting. No, actually, it was surprising. Their images completely lacked any signs of violence. Strangely enough.
That's interesting.
Part of that might be due to the fact that they had been in the shelter for a while, the shelter system, and other volunteers had come in before me and encouraged them to find imagery that expressed themselves, that was not violent. And actually, most of the artwork they did together as a family, so there was a lot more images of love and affection depicted.
It was a little more of a democratic creation process in that sense.
Yeah.
So do you think the art would have been different if it would have been an individualized process?
Absolutely, yeah,
Do you
I
think-
do. And I think that especially if the children had been allowed to really show what was in their heads, I think that the imagery would have been a little more violent.
A little more violent, yeah, because that's what I wonder is because I understand the process, and I understand the goals of the process of creating art together, because it is a nonverbal way to communicate, but I almost wonder if that is kind of being stumped by the expectations of, well, this is a family space and it should be loving. So there's not really, while it would allow, under ideal conditions, for this nonverbal exchange of communication, I almost wonder if it doesn't allow for it in the actual politicized realm of the family.
Right. Yeah, I guess it wasn't as expressive as it could have been. It was more a team-building exercise in this sense. It was art as a means of healing. But you're absolutely right.
Could you give me like a hypothetical image that you would see? Like I'm trying to wrap my head around what you would be looking at.
Sure. Well, we would do very specific projects, to be honest. So there was a certain amount of instruction involved. We did a family tree at one point, which actually was a really surprising art project because I was expecting a very traditional family tree.
Mhm.
But instead they did these, some of them didn't even do trees. They just did these separate images that kind of, expressed who they were and what they loved. And some of them created hands that they were holding hands, and each hand represented one member of the family. And that to them was a family tree. So they understood basically what a family tree communicates, that it's about bonds and how you're tied to one another, even though they didn't necessarily portray it in the
So
form
they
of a
moved
tree.
beyond the
Yeah.
tree. Maybe the tree isn't really applicable to their families, and so why use a model
Right.
that doesn't work?
Exactly.
That makes sense.
That's really interesting.
Doesn't it? Yeah. Well, why don't you tell me about